For more on how South Africa can make its way off the grey list, we're now joined by Professor Chris Malikane from the Wits Business School, and he joins us now via our video link. Prof, thank you so much for your time this evening here in SABC News. I mean, the Finance Minister there being very optimistic and saying that, well, he expects South Africa to be off the grey listing by as early as next year. How possible is that?
As you put it, is very optimistic, but when you look at what the FATF is saying, what they want is actually very deep-seated institutional and structural changes that need to happen. So if I can mention just a few, just to show the major challenge. Number one, FATF identified the fact that there seems to be lack of information flow between the banks and law enforcement agencies like the Financial Intelligence Center, National Prosecuting Authority, and SABC. And because of that, then the system is not acting fast enough to suspected suspicious transactions, people who are suspected of engaging in these illegal activities. And then the second point is that the institutions that are supposed to be enforcing the FATF regulations basically do not have capacity to do so. So if you look at the FATF intelligence, they are saying that there needs to be training in SABC, there needs to be training in FIC, there needs to be training in the FSCA, and also there needs to be training in the NPA to build capacity for this institution to efficiently enforce the rules. And then lastly, South Africa has been found to be very slow in reacting to requests from international agencies about pursuing certain criminals who happen to be in South Africa. And South Africa itself is not following up on cases of criminals taking money out of the country. So it seems like South Africa is not efficient, or it does not have capacity to deal with these problems.
And you're speaking about a very intricate and an elaborate process here that needs to take place in order for South Africa to remove itself off the grey listing list. How far are we as a country when it comes to moving to a point where we can see what the Finance Minister is saying, that, in the near future, perhaps, we would be removed from the grey listing list?
There are low-hanging fruits that have been identified. For example, the need to upgrade the risk assessment mechanisms, the storage of files, and the need to follow up on certain individuals who are suspected of engaging in criminal activities as identified by FATF. So those are low-hanging fruits. The big problems that South Africa faces, that I think the Minister of Finance will not be able to solve within such a short space of time, are those institutional weaknesses within SABC. And we should not forget the fact that even some senior members of SABC and these institutions that we're talking about are implicated in some of these criminal activities. So when you look at FATF, it's not making this, coming to these conclusions without doing an investigation of South Africa, because they know that there are certain criminal gangs that are operating in South Africa, but they are waiting for South African authorities to see if they can act on those gangs. And so far, FATF is not satisfied that South Africa is actually knowing what is happening within its own economy.
We are told that most countries, it takes them up to 5 years to be fully removed from grey listing. Which countries were able to actually do it under a very short space of time, which is the target of the Finance Minister?
I don't know any of the countries that have managed to get off the short list within 6 months or even 7 months, given the fact that FATF tends to identify institutional problems and capacity problems inside these economies that are aligned to it. So I don't know of any country that managed to get off the FATF grey list in such a short space of time.
And of course, looking at the issue around being a grey listed, I mean, you have noted a number of challenges and the things that South Africa still needs to do. But I'm sure there is a process that has been followed so far. How far are we as a country in terms of removing ourselves from being grey listed? Because, I mean, the Minister really speaks very positively around this.
Yeah, there are 22 action items. So, so far as I know, they managed to implement about 8 of them. As to whether the implementation of that 8 is in line with the standards as set by FATF is something else. So, because at this point, South Africa is evaluating itself as to whether they are implementing to the required level of rigor as required by FATF is something else.
How does perhaps maybe, now that we find ourselves under a government of national unity, does that play any role here when it comes to removing South Africa from being grey-listed, especially now that, the issue of accountability will always come to the fore because it's not just one party leading the state?
I don't think being having a GNU or not is going to assist. What is important is FATF is firm on those recommendations that they say the country must implement, because they're using international standards, regardless of the types of governments that are aligned, or types of governments that are aligned to it. What they have their own standards, and they expect countries that are aligned to FATF to implement those standards.
According to your knowledge and your analysis and what you've seen so far, how long do you think it will take for South Africa to be fully removed from greylisting?
I think the starting point is to check the extent to which South Africa is professionalizing some of the law enforcement agencies. For example, there is a need to seriously professionalize the South African Police Service, as a basis for the South African Police Service to have professional capacity to fulfill these international standards. So I think that in terms of improving the capacity of the institutions that are supposed to implement the FATF recommendations, South Africa is not confident that even within the next 2 years we'll be able to do it. Unless we have a strong political leadership that is firm, that is not going to implement policies half-heartedly without fearing people and not, and being biased. There needs to be clear implementation, and a strong oversight coming from Parliament. It is going to assist the country in pushing the minister to get us out of the grey list.
Professor, thank you so much for that insight. That is Professor Malikane, Chris Malikane. He is from the Wits Business School. Well, he says that it's still going to take quite some time until South Africa is removed from a grey listing. But of course, the finance minister, they're being very optimistic and saying that by next year, South Africa should have been removed.